Here, episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of White Zombie. And White Zombie formed in New York City in 1985, and in the early 90s they just literally exploded. In the early 90s there was a new subgenre of metal known as groove metal that was introduced, and right around the same time that Pantera just erupted, you know, in the early 90s, even though technically they were moshing in Texas for years before they exploded. But groove metal was kind of attached to them. Eventually bands, you know, like Machine Head and Lamb of God and Prong, and White Zombie definitely fits in that, you know, kind of group too. So here's an image with some famous groove metal bands. White Zombie formed in 1985, and they eventually broke up in 1998, and within that time frame they released 4, you know, full-length albums and 4 EPs. I think there's some compilations and maybe a live album or something in there too. But these early, you know, releases from White Zombie are radically different than what they became known for in the 90s. You know, their early, you know, kind of mid-80s and late 80s output was more noise rock, very experimental and avant-garde, all these samples and just crazy noises and screaming and all this stuff. And then eventually they kind of merged with metal and kind of moved in a new direction. White Zombie's secret weapon was Jay Younger on guitar. And there's some mystery about Jay because there's not really a lot of information about him online. He did record an album before White Zombie, before he started working with these guys. And then he did do a couple things after White Zombie, and then he just kind of disappeared. So I have no idea what he's up to these days. But he was a really interesting guitarist with this band, and he was bringing in these elements of old school thrash and speed metal, and kind of combined it with Rob Zombie's, you know, love of, you know, sampling and these just kind of erratic beats and different things. And speaking of horror movies, if you're looking for some things to watch this month, Rob Zombie's approaching his 10th feature film. He got picked up to do the kind of reboot of The Munsters, which I'm really interested in that. I have a hunch it's going to be kind of dark compared to the, you know, TV show, which I love, The Munsters, for sure. But here's an image with some of Rob Zombie's films, so if some of these you haven't seen, check them out. The music featured in this lesson is going to come from 2 albums, Sexorcisto Devil Music Volume 1 and Astro-Creep 2000. And they have other albums, but that's, you know, those 2 albums are going to be the ones that I am going to feature in this lesson. And we have 2 albums and 2 different approaches and tunings too. So to make this easier, you know, if you see me with the Strat and the Sexorcisto album there on the wall, then we're in standard tuning. And then later in this lesson, when you see me switch to the Les Paul, you'll also see the album artwork changes, and that's going to be a different tuning. So this is standard with the Strat. And when I move over to the Les Paul, that's going to be down a half step and then drop D. So here we go. With the opening, that's Cosmic Inc. or Cosmic Monsters Incorporated, something like this. definitely a heavy, you know, old school thrash influence, speed metal influences. And in the beginning, you're really just pummeling that low E open. And next up, this really just sounds like an Overkill or Anthrax riff or something, but we're doing this. You can see we're shifting from that low E open, and then he starts hitting that open A, and he's also grabbing E flat to D right there, like this. And then right there he's grabbing this what, A flat to G, right? So E flat to D, A flat to G. You know, totally a thrash move right there, that C, B to C back and forth. And you're sliding, you know, those first chords and then kind of bouncing down here, like this. Then go back to that low E and just bang it. And do it again. And then right there he does this really tasty single note riff, kind of like half pinch harmonics, you know, half squeals right there. And then he starts totally doing this thrash riff. It's, you know, the low E just banging on it, and then that B flat to A, B flat to G, and then that G, A to B flat, like this. And then just throw it in the pit like this. Next to Starface, and this is really cool. Something like this. Something like that. So it starts with this F sharp power chord, and then you're doing these stacked power chords up here. There's an F sharp over C sharp and an E over B, like this. And then right there when you get to that E over B, you're actually going to switch it to just B major and just play the bottom 4 strings. Don't worry about the B or the high E. And then you want to twist that B major to B minor right there. And then you hear these heavy chugs on A and G sharp 5, and then back down to that F sharp 5 again, like this. And the second time right there, you're going to move to this A5 and just kind of bang on it like this. And then there's a single note riff right here, back in F sharp. You know, kind of almost reminds me of Guns N' Roses a little bit right there, but like this. So it's got this weird kind of quirky rhythm to it. And then it's kind of like an F sharp blues, and this is really cool, the single note riff. Then you want to finish with this. Kind of bending lick right there. Really cool song, and I love the chord progression and the riffs happening in that one. You know, great tune. Next up is Spiderbaby, and it's something like this. Something like that. So we're starting with this stacked power chord there. That's a C sharp over G sharp, and he's just letting that ring. It has that massive sound. And then there's two quick hits on that G5, and then you want to cut it off, right? And then go back to that C sharp over G sharp again, and then the G5, and it's like 2 and then 4 hits right there. Back to that C sharp over G sharp, and you're just kind of going back and forth in that first part. Time there's this overdubbed kind of noise, I was just hitting like a tapped harmonic on that G, like that, and then you hear this riff. You know, pretty easy, but it's just F sharp, and you're kind of opening up that low E string, and then just climbing up E, F sharp to G. And he's overdubbed in that too. I think there's, you know, some higher octaves and harmonies of that, you know, that part, something like that. But you know, pretty simple riff. Just kind of creates that White Zombie mosh kind of riff sound, you know, which is really cool and kind of a signature sound for the band. Okay, next up is Blood Milk and Sky from the Astro-Creep 2000 album, and you can see I'm on my Les Paul. So now we're tuned down a half step and in drop D. And in the beginning, there's two guitar parts. There's this kind of heavy, distorted, you know, power chord riff, and then this eerie, kind of clean, you know, almost sounds like something from a horror film. I think it has delay on it, and it's an overdub, but I'm going to try to replicate that at the same time and then flesh out the rest of this riff. But something like this. So in the beginning, they're really just pummeling, you know, that D5 with the open strings. And then you hear this, like I said earlier, this kind of sinister, kind of spooky thing. That's what I came up with. I'm not really sure what's going on there. It may not even be a guitar, but I think it is. It has like this kind of chorusy, clean sound to it. And it's an overdub. So I'm just, you know, trying to mimic that like this. So it doesn't sound quite right because it's literally an overdub with these effects and stuff on it. But then you hear it palm muted, and it goes to this almost kind of a Tool riff like this. Then you hear these massive, you know, drop D power chords. So there's a D5 right there, and you're playing 5 of the 6 strings on the guitar. So just let that ring and roar. And then you hear that D5 move up here, and that's basically a D sus2, and you're still using 5 strings, but now you're grabbing that A, D, and that E note, which is the sus2. Like that. Definitely, you know, White Zombie, there's a bunch of examples of this. Dream Theater and Pantera, there's a bunch of bands. In the 90s, I learned, like, wow, you can play one-finger power chords, you know, and keep this, you know, kind of simple, you know, power chord riffs. But you could also use drop D and make these massive chords like this, and I love that stuff. There's D sus2. that D5. And then the second time there's D minor right there, a big 5-string D minor chord like this. And then do it again, D5, D sus2, D5, and then that D minor. Such a cool song too. I think that might be one of my favorite White Zombie songs. Okay, next up is Blur the Technicolor, which is also from Astro-Creep 2000. I'm still on the Les Paul, so that means we're tuned down a half step and a drop D. And we're basically looking at some devil music, in this lesson. And this song opens with totally just a devil chord. It's something like this. So that opening chord, that's really cool. That's going to basically be, keep in mind we're in drop D too, and tuned down a half step. But that's going to be a D minor 7 flat 5 right there, which is really cool because there's your open D, another D on the A string, there's your flat 5, that A flat, there's your 7, that C, and then you're just doubling that D note there on the B string too. So once again, there's 5 notes in this chord. But, it just sounds really sinister, especially with all that distortion and stuff. And then you just hear it cut off right there. If you have a kill switch or something, step on your kill switch or flick it. I'm just using my volume knob there just to kind of silence that chord and also to get rid of that kind of buzzy noise because I'm sitting right on top of my amp. But anyway, you're going to do that about 4 times. That's just really sinister and scary. And the last time he actually dives the bar, I was just bending the chord to try to emulate the sound. And then you hear this, and it's just brutal. You're literally just kind of moving back and forth. It's technically a G and an A flat right there. And you also hear that kind of slight bend and kind of a slight pinch harmonic on that C. And then eventually you'll hear these 1-finger power chords, F to G. And then just the low strings open. And then you hear this really clever, kind of random, harmonic fill right there. And you can hear harmonic fills like that from other bands, Stone Temple Pilots, Living Colour. There's a bunch of groups that kind of played with this. Think of a Mud Shovel by the band Stained, and you can hear a whole bunch of those kind of randomized harmonics. And it's interesting, when you move down, you hear the harmonics go up, and then when you ascend, you hear the harmonics go down. I love playing with that kind of stuff. But what a cool, riff and song. Of course, that really dark D minor 7 flat 5. You gotta love that. last example is from the song I Am Legend. So we're back on the Sexorcisto album. You can see I'm back on my Strat, so we're in standard tuning. And it's this beautiful, finger-picked guitar part. And I'm just a sucker for these kind of clean, finger-style guitar parts like this. But something like this. It starts with this. That's basically E minor, and then you're going to take the fretted part and move it down a half step, and then that's going to transform to an E flat augmented sharp 9. Like that. So it's E minor, E flat augmented sharp 9, and you're doing this kind of rolling arpeggiated pattern. Alright, and then you're going to move to the C add 9, which is pretty common. And the pattern, something like that. And then do that E minor again. And then it's going to change to this. So it's really just the open D and the second fret there on the high E with the open G and B. And that's going to be a D6 add 11. And then back to that C add 9. And then right there, you're going to hear it move to B minor, which that's tricky right there. And then right there, you hear it shift up to this, and it's really just a D octave, kind of a glorified D octave, because you're playing D, the octave of D, and then the open D. So there's 3 Ds. Technically, it's just 2 different notes or pitches of D. But you've got this blurry, almost hypnotic kind of sound when you play those like this. Pretty cool. And then you're doing this. And we actually saw this recently in the Queensryche, the clean chords from Operation Mindcrime. And you can think of that as an A minor flat 5. And since we're playing the 5th, which is E, and the flat 5, which is E flat, you could also think of that as an A5 sharp 11. It just depends on how you want to look at that. And then you start moving back and forth between that D octave and that A minor flat 5 or A5 sharp 11. But that sounds like right out, it's right out of a horror movie or something. That has a really cool, kind of hypnotic and eerie sound. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of White Zombie, and I've been a fan ever since that album, hit the scene, Sexorcisto. And there's just something about their music. I know when I picked them up on MTV and Headbangers Ball and stuff, and I thought, who are these guys? And I picked up on the horror, references and samples, and of course, the old school, thrash and metal riffs and stuff. And I thought, okay, I like this. It's different. It's not, the typical metal that I might find myself putting on and listening to, but I like it. I think it's that horror connection. I really do like Rob Zombie. And definitely Jay Younger, is an underappreciated. I mean, nobody is talking about Jay Younger or even remembers that he was in the band, it seems. Unless they're a fan, they remember. But he had a column in Guitar World, for a couple of years, I think, and just a really interesting guitarist. I'd love to find out, what he's been up to or what he's been doing, since he left White Zombie in 1998. So there's a big, kind of span of time where it's like, man, where is that guy? So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.